Two sisters live isolated from the world because of a definitive diagnosis, until an unlikely woman awakens something no one ever dared to see. The Adams mansion stood out against the mountainous landscape of Asheville like a fortress of stone and silence. Its well-maintained gardens and imposing architecture contrasted with the atmosphere of desolation that hung within its walls. The key. Morning sun illuminated the colored stained glass of the main entrance, projecting patches of light across the marble floor that no one seemed to notice or appreciate. Nathan Adams walked down the long corridor with heavy steps. Tall with an elegant bearing, his face carried the marks of a man who no longer found purpose beyond routine. His green eyes, which once reflected ambition and hope, now displayed only the resignation of a man who had grown accustomed to absence. Impeccably dressed in his navy blue suit, he held a tablet in his right hand, where he monitored the shares of his technology company, while in his left he carried the inevitable cup of coffee that kept him functioning through the days. "Sir, the girls' breakfast has been served," informed Rebecca, the housekeeper who had managed the house for more than 5 years. An efficient and discreet woman who knew how to respect the emptiness that inhabited each room. "Did they eat?" asked Nathan, without taking his eyes off the screen where numbers and graphs seemed more comprehensible than life itself. "Very little, as usual. Katie accepted some fruit, but Bella only drank a little juice." Nathan nodded without comment. He had given up trying to understand his daughter's eating patterns, just as he had given up on so many other battles over the years. The twins, now 12 years old, were a mystery that science had not been able to fully unravel. Diagnosed with irreversible blindness shortly after birth, they had grown up in a separate world, protected by thick walls and the isolation he had deemed necessary. "The new employee has arrived," continued Rebecca hesitantly. "Mrs. Sarah Wilson. She's waiting in the living room as you instructed." A sigh escaped Nathan's thin lips. Another one. How many had already passed through that house? Specialists, therapists, nannies, private tutors, all arrived loaded with promises and innovative techniques, all left defeated by the impenetrability of the girls, who seemed to exist in a parallel universe accessible only to themselves. "Tell her I'll be there in 10 minutes, he finally answered, tucking the tablet into his jacket pocket. "And prepare the temporary hiring documents, 3 months probation as usual." Rebecca nodded and withdrew with the silent efficiency that characterized all the employees of that house. Nathan knew that few could bear the weight of that environment for very long. The routine was heavy, the girls rarely responded to stimuli, and his own presence was increasingly rare and distant. He climbed the stairs toward his daughter's room. The second floor of the mansion was the private realm of Catherine and Isabella. Spacious, adapted with all the resources money could buy. Floors with different textures for tactile orientation, braille labels, sound systems, special toys imported from the best centers for the visually impaired in the world, a perfect environment for children who had never shown interest in exploring. He stopped at the half-open door. The twins were sitting on the soft carpet, motionless like two small statues, so identical that only he could distinguish them at first glance. Katie had an almost imperceptible mark near her upper lip, while Bella had slightly longer fingers. Both had brown curly hair, fair skin with naturally rosy cheeks, and eyes, those brown eyes that couldn't see, fixed on nothing. "Good morning, girls," said Nathan, forcing a lighter tone of voice than his mood allowed. No response. Just a slight movement of Katie's head, while Bella remained completely motionless as if she hadn't heard. It was always like this. The girls reacted little, spoke even less, existing in a world of sensations he could never comprehend. "I'm going to meet the new helper today," he continued, even knowing he probably wouldn't get a response. "Her name is Sarah, and she comes from the countryside. Rebecca said she has experience with, well, with special cases." Special cases. That's how he referred to his daughter's condition when he needed to explain to strangers, as if blindness were just the surface layer of something much deeper and inexplicable. Doctors had tried various diagnoses over the years. In addition to blindness, they spoke of developmental delay, autism, sensory disorders. But no label seemed to fit perfectly. The girls simply existed in their own universe. "Daddy is going downstairs now. If you need anything, Rebecca is downstairs." He turned to leave, but something made him stop, a whisper so low he almost thought he had imagined it. "Blue." It was Bella's voice, who remained motionless, her face turned toward the window, where the curtains filtered the morning light. "What did you say, sweetheart?" Nathan turned back, his heart racing. Silence, as if the word had been just a trick of his mind, desperate for any sign of connection. He sighed and gently closed the door. It wasn't the first time he'd imagined words or gestures that didn't exist. Hope, even when suffocated by years of frustration, found ways to emerge at the most unexpected moments. He descended the stairs, trying to organize his thoughts. The life he led wasn't the one he had planned. A successful businessman, creator, of a digital security system that had revolutionized the market. Nathan Adams should have been at the height of his career, traveling the world, expanding his business. Instead, he managed the company from a distance, declined invitations to international conferences, and remained bound to that mansion that seemed more like a mausoleum of interrupted dreams. Upon entering the living room, he found a middle-aged woman sitting with her hands folded in her lap. She wasn't what he expected. After years of hiring specialists with international degrees and modern techniques, the figure before him seemed to have come from another time. Grey hair tied in a simple bun, face marked by the sun, hands that showed years of manual labor. She was dressed simply, a long navy blue skirt and a white long-sleeved blouse without jewelry or adornments, except for a small wooden pendant on her neck. "Mrs. Wilson?" he asked formally, extending his hand. The woman rose with a tranquil movement and smiled. There was something in her dark eyes that disconcerted him, a direct, penetrating gaze, as if she could see beyond appearances. "You can call me Sarah, Mr. Adams," she replied, with a soft but firm voice, carrying the characteristic accent of rural North Carolina. "I appreciate the opportunity to work in your home. Rebecca must have explained that we're looking for someone to help with general services, not specifically to care for my daughters," clarified Nathan, sitting in the opposite armchair. "We have specialized professionals who come regularly for the girls' therapies." Sarah nodded, the smile never leaving her lips. "I understand perfectly, sir. I'm here to help wherever necessary." "Do you have experience in family homes?" "I've worked in many homes throughout my life," she replied vaguely, "each with its own needs. The important thing is knowing how to listen to what the walls have to say." Nathan frowned, intrigued by the unconventional answer. "And what do the walls say, Mrs. Wilson?" Sarah's smile widened, revealing white, perfect teeth that contrasted with her rustic appearance. "That there's a lot of light wanting to come in, Mr. Adams, a lot of dormant light. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue." Sarah's first week at the mansion passed without fanfare. She fulfilled her tasks with a silent efficiency. That pleased Rebecca, the housekeeper always attentive to the smallest details. She cleaned, organized, helped in the kitchen when necessary, all with a naturalness that made her seem like she had been part of the house for years, not days. What no one noticed, however, were the small changes she implemented in the environment, as subtle as the breeze that now circulated through the previously always closed corridors. Windows that remained locked were opened to receive the morning sun. Pots with aromatic herbs appeared discreetly in the corners of the kitchen, basil, rosemary, lavender. The aroma of cinnamon and cloves began to emanate from the cupboards, and a low melody, almost a murmur, accompanied her steps as she worked. Old songs, the kind that crossed generations in the small towns of rural North Carolina. Nathan, absorbed in his video conferences and spreadsheets, barely noticed these changes. His office on the first floor was his refuge, the only place where he could distance himself from the shadows that inhabited the rest of the house. There, among numbers and codes, he found a logic that his personal life had denied him. On the fourth day, as she passed through the corridor leading to the girls' quarters, Sarah heard a sound that made her stop. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. A light tinkling, as if someone were touching a glass surface with the tips of their fingers. She approached the half-open door and observed. Katie was sitting on the floor, near the window, where a sliver of light entered through the cracks in the curtain. Her fingers moved slowly over the surface of a colorful xylophone that had remained untouched for years among the many therapeutic toys scattered around the room. She wasn't producing a melody, properly speaking, but was exploring the notes with fair hesitant curiosity, her head slightly tilted as if listening to something beyond the sound. Sarah didn't say anything. She observed for a few seconds and continued on her way, but something in her face had changed. A discreet smile, almost imperceptible, illuminated her eyes. The next day, while cleaning the room while the girls were in the bath supervised by Rebecca, Sarah positioned the xylophone closer to the window, exactly where the ray of sunlight crossed the curtains in the morning. Next to it, she placed a small metal bell that she carried in her pocket, a simple piece with a crystalline sound that her grandmother had given her decades ago. That same afternoon, while arranging the clothes in the closet adjacent to a room, she heard something that made her heart race, a laugh. Soft, contained, but unmistakably a child's laugh. She approached the door again and saw Bella, the quieter of the two, with the small bell in her hand, swinging it gently, her face turned in the exact direction from which the sound came. "You like music," whispered Sarah to herself, as if confirming a suspicion. The following days brought a different routine. Without fanfare, Sarah began to leave small sound-making objects in the girls' path. Bells, shells, pieces of bamboo that produced different sounds when touched. In the windows, she hung crystals that refracted light at different angles throughout. Today, on the small table where the twins had their meals, she placed pots with various aromatic herbs, each with its characteristic smell. "What are these things?" asked Rebecca, frowning as she noticed the changes. "Just some helps to make the house breathe better," answered Sarah with simplicity. "The air was very stagnant in here." Rebecca hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with unauthorized changes, but something in Sarah's tranquility prevented her from protesting. Besides, though she wouldn't admit it, she had noticed that the girls seemed more present since the changes had begun. On a Saturday afternoon, when Nathan was exceptionally not working, Sarah was preparing tea in the kitchen when she heard footsteps in the corridor. They were hesitant footsteps, almost dragged, but clearly belonged to someone small. She went out to the corridor and found Katie feeling the wall moving slowly toward the kitchen. "Smell," said the girl in a low voice, almost a whisper. "Sweet." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She had been working in that house for 2 weeks, and it was the first time she had heard Katie's voice. She calmly approached and crouched down to be at the girl's height. "It's cinnamon with apple, little one. I'm making tea." Katie remained motionless for a moment, her face turned in the direction of Sarah's voice as if studying her. Then she extended her hand hesitantly in the air. "Can I feel?" With delicacy, Sarah took the small hand between her own and guided it to her face. She let Katie's fingers explore her features, the forehead, the eyebrows, the nose, the lips. That smiled. The girl concentrated on this exploration with surprising intensity. "You have music in your voice," she finally said, lowering her hand. Before Sarah could respond, they heard Rebecca's alarmed voice coming from the second floor. "Katie! Where are you? My God, how did you come down the stairs alone?" The housekeeper appeared in the corridor, visibly disturbed. Seeing the girl with Sarah, her expression oscillated between relief and confusion. She came here by herself?" "She followed the smell of tea," answered Sarah naturally. "She has a very good sense of smell." Rebecca approached, still perplexed. "This has never happened before. They never leave the room without being guided." Katie remained quiet, but didn't seem frightened or lost. There was a small wrinkle of concentration on her forehead, as if she were processing new information. "I think she's beginning to map the house," commented Sarah. "It's natural. Children need to explore their environment." "These aren't ordinary children, Mrs. Wilson," reprimanded Rebecca, taking Katie's hand. "Mr. Adams has specific rules about the girls. They shouldn't walk around the house alone. It's dangerous with their condition." Sarah nodded respectfully, but her eyes reflected a serene conviction. Every child needs to discover their limits, with a special condition or not. Overprotection can also be a form of prison. The comment clearly bothered Rebecca, who began to guide Katie back to the second floor. However, to the surprise of both women, the girl resisted. "Tea," she said firmly. "I want to try the tea." Rebecca looked at Sarah, not knowing how to react. Never before had the twins shown so much interest in something, much less insisted on a desire. "I can prepare a cup for her," offered Sarah. "It's just cinnamon with apple, nothing that can do harm." Reluctantly, Rebecca agreed. The three went to the kitchen, where Sarah served a small amount of tea in a cup suitable for children, making sure it was warm enough. "Carefully," she instructed, guiding Katie's hands around the cup. "Feel the heat first." The girl followed, the instructions with surprising attention, feeling the steam with her hands before bringing the cup to her lips for a small sip. A hesitant smile appeared on her usually expressionless face. "Sweet," she repeated, satisfied. At that moment, they heard another sound coming from the corridor. Bella was standing at the entrance to the kitchen, one hand resting on the wall, the other extended in front as if feeling the air. "Belle," called Katie, turning her face in the direction of her sister. "Come, sweet tea." Rebecca was astonished. The twins rarely communicated verbally, even with each other. What was happening? Sarah observed everything with tranquility, as if she had always expected this moment. She approached Bella and with gentle gestures helped her enter the kitchen and sit beside her sister. "What's happening here?" Nathan's deep voice suddenly sounded, making everyone turn. He was standing at the door of the kitchen, observing the unusual scene. His daughters, who normally remained isolated in their room, sitting at the kitchen table like two ordinary children having afternoon tea. Rebecca hurried to explain. "Mr. Adams, Katie came down by herself and—" "They followed the smell of tea," interrupted Sarah, showing no discomfort before Nathan's inquisitive look. "Children are naturally curious." Nathan approached slowly, observing his daughters with a mixture of confusion and something that could be interpreted as hope. "They've never done this before," he said, more to himself than to the other people present. "Perhaps they never had a reason," answered Sarah calmly. "Or perhaps they just hadn't discovered they could." Bella, as if sensing her father's presence, turned her face in his direction. "Dad," she said, her voice so low it was almost inaudible. "Pretty Belle." Nathan frowned, confused. "Belle?" Sarah took the small metal bell from her pocket. "This one," she explained, making it tinkle softly. "I left it in their room. They seem to have liked the sound." The businessman looked at the simple object, then at the woman who held it, and finally at his daughters, who showed more attention and presence than he had witnessed in years. "What exactly are you doing with my daughters, Mrs. Wilson?" he asked, his tone oscillating between distrust and curiosity. Sarah sustained his gaze with serenity. "I'm just reminding them that the world exists, Mr. Adams, and that they have the right to explore it." That night, after the girls were put to bed, Nathan remained in his office mentally reviewing the scene in the kitchen. Something was changing and he didn't know whether to fear or celebrate. The change in the twins, though subtle, was undeniable. After a month of Sarah's arrival, the routine of the mansion had been transformed. The girls no longer remained confined to their room. They explored the corridors of the house with growing confidence, guiding themselves by touching the walls, and by the different sounds and aromas that Sarah had strategically distributed throughout the environments. The kitchen had become one of their favorite places, attracted by the aromatic teas and the stories that Sarah told while preparing meals. Rebecca observed everything with a mixture of amazement and distrust. As housekeeper for so many years, she had witnessed the passage of dozens of specialists through the house, renowned neurologists, behavioral therapists, pedagogues, all carrying sophisticated methods and state-of-the-art equipment. None of them had achieved what that simple woman was accomplishing with herbs, sounds, and patience. "How do you do it?" she asked one morning, as she observed Bella sitting on the veranda floor, her face raised to the sun, a tranquil smile on her lips. Sarah, who was arranging flowers in a vase nearby, answered without diverting her gaze from her task. "I don't do anything special, Mrs. Rebecca. I just help awaken what is already within them." But they were diagnosed with irreversible blindness. All the doctors confirmed it. Sarah finally looked at the housekeeper, her dark eyes reflecting a tranquil wisdom. "There are many ways to see the world beyond the eyes, Mrs. Rebecca. Some people see with their fingers, others with their ears, others with something that medicine still cannot name." Rebecca frowned, uncomfortable with explanations that escaped the medical and scientific logic that Nathan had always prioritized. Mr. Adams spent fortunes on the best specialists in the world. If there was any chance of improvement, they would have discovered it. An understanding smile appeared on Sarah's lips. "Science is a wonderful path, but it's not the only one. My grandfather healed pains that doctors couldn't explain. My mother helped children to be born when doctors had already given up. I'm not saying medicine is wrong, I'm saying that some things exist in the spaces between what we know." The conversation was interrupted by Katie, who approached with hesitant but determined steps, guiding herself by the sound of the voices. "Sarah," she called, extending her hand in the air. "Tell the bluebird story." "Of course, little one," answered Sarah, taking the girl's hand and guiding her to sit beside her sister. "But first, let's call Bella to listen too." To Rebecca's surprise, it wasn't necessary to call. As if she had heard her name, Bella turned in their direction, stood up and walked with surprising precision to where her sister was sitting. "Story," she said simply, settling beside Katie. Rebecca moved away, still observing the scene with distrust. There was something in that interaction that escaped her comprehension, as if the girls somehow knew more than they demonstrated. As she climbed the stairs toward Nathan's office for the daily report, the housekeeper didn't notice that down below, while Sarah narrated the story of the bluebird that could see through the clouds, the twins moved their hands in the air, as if following the flight of something invisible to others. Nathan Adams stared at the computer screen without really seeing the data that presented itself before him. His mind was occupied with the changes he had witnessed in recent weeks. His daughters, who for years had existed as almost ghostly presences in the house, now demonstrated distinct personalities, their own wills, curiosity. Katie, always the more assertive one, now asked questions about everything. How the radio worked, why the rain made that noise on the roof, what the color blue was like. Bella, more introspective, spoke less, but her presence had intensified in other ways. She had learned to play simple melodies on the xylophone, created patterns with colored stones that she could not see, and always seemed to know when someone entered the room even before the person spoke. "Excuse me, sir." Rebecca's voice interrupted his thoughts. "May I give the day's report?" Nathan made an affirmative gesture, preparing himself for the usual list of medications, foods consumed, and activities performed by the girls, a routine he had maintained for years, as if the data could offer some explanation for his daughter's condition. "The girls had a quite active morning," began Rebecca, consulting her notes. "They had a complete breakfast, accepted all the fruits offered. Then they spent about 2 hours on the veranda with Mrs. Wilson, who told stories while they explored different textures of plants from the garden." Nathan nodded, still distracted. "There's something you need to know," continued Rebecca hesitantly. "Something unusual happened during yesterday night's storm. This captured the businessman's attention." "What happened?" "The girls were in their room when the thunderstorm started. You know how they normally get agitated with loud noises." Nathan knew. Thunderstorms had always been particularly difficult for the twins, who were startled by sudden and intense sounds. "But yesterday was different," continued Rebecca. "When the first lightning struck, both turned exactly toward the window and pointed. Bella said something like 'strong light,' and Katie completed saying 'blue and white.'" A shiver ran down Nathan's spine. The girls had never described colors or lights before. How could they if they had never seen? Was Mrs. Wilson with them at this moment? "No, sir. She was in the kitchen preparing dinner. It was I who witnessed it." Nathan stood up, walking to the window of his office. From there, he could see part of the garden where his daughters were now playing under Sarah's supervision. The woman was sitting on a stone bench, braiding what appeared to be a small crown of flowers, while the girls explored the lawn around, moving with a confidence they had never shown before. "Rebecca, what do you think of this woman? This Sarah?" "Wilson?" The housekeeper hesitated, weighing her words. "She is different, sir. She doesn't have the conventional methods we're accustomed to, but I can't deny that the girls respond to her in a way I've never seen before." "Do you think she's healing them in some way?" Rebecca adjusted her apron, visibly uncomfortable with the question. "I don't know if I would use that word, sir. I don't believe in miraculous cures, but she seems to be awakening something in the girls, some ability that was dormant. She calls this the eyes of silence." "Eyes of silence," repeated Nathan, thoughtful. "What exactly does that mean?" "She said that some people, especially children, develop senses beyond the conventional when deprived of one of them, as if the body created new paths to perceive the world." Nathan turned his attention back to the garden. At that moment, Katie seemed to follow with her fingers the flight of a butterfly passing by, turning her body in the exact direction of the insect, as if she could see it. The scene was as impossible as it was undeniable. "I want to know more about this woman Rebecca, where she came from exactly, who recommended her, what her background is." "Mrs. Oliveira recommended her, sir, the former cook who worked here for 5 years. And what else do we know about her?" "Just what's in the hiring documents. Born in Pine Ridge, a small town about 40 kilometers from here, worked in various family homes in the region, has no formal education beyond elementary school." Nathan frowned. A woman with no specific qualifications was achieving what teams of specialists had failed to achieve for years. "I want you to observe her more closely, Rebecca. Every detail, every technique she uses with the girls, and I want daily reports." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew, leaving Nathan immersed in thoughts. Something was happening with his daughters, something that defied everything that doctors and specialists had claimed to be impossible. And at the center of this transformation was a simple woman from rural North Carolina, carrying ancestral knowledge and a perception that transcended conventional medicine. He decided it was time to investigate more deeply. In the mansion's library, Nathan searched the internet for information about the small town of Pine Ridge and its local traditions. He discovered that the region was known for preserving traditional medicine practices, with faith healers and healers who blended Native American, African, and European knowledge. One article in particular caught his attention: "Guardians of Knowledge, the Healing Women of the Blue Ridge Valley." The text mentioned families that for generations had kept alive healing knowledge through herbs, rituals, and a differentiated understanding of human nature. Among the surnames cited was Wilson. The businessman printed the article and continued his research, increasingly intrigued. In a doctoral thesis on popular medicine in North Carolina, he found references to a healer known as Old Joe Wilson, famous in the region for his ability to see beyond and heal ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. Could this be the grandfather Sarah had mentioned? His reflections were interrupted by sounds coming from downstairs. Children's laughter, something so rare in that house that it made him stand up immediately. He descended the stairs toward the living room, from where the sounds were coming. The scene he found paralyzed him at the entrance. The twins were sitting on the floor in front of Sarah, who was holding a small bowl with water. The woman dipped her fingers in the water and shook them lightly, creating droplets that reflected the sunlight entering through the window. Each time the drops glittered in the air, the girls laughed and extended their hands, as if trying to capture the fragments of light. "Rain of stars," said Bella, normally the quieter of the two. "Shine, shine." "They're like little suns," completed Katie, moving her fingers in the air as if drawing. "Many colors." Nathan remained motionless, unable to breathe. His daughters were describing light, colors, things that, according to all, diagnoses they should never be able to perceive. It was then that Sarah noticed him standing at the entrance. Without showing surprise, she smiled and made a gesture inviting him to approach. "Come, Mr. Adams, we're playing with light." The girls immediately turned their faces in his direction, as if they also perceived his presence. "Dad," called Katie, extending her hand. "Come see the rain of stars." With hesitant steps, Nathan approached and sat on the sofa near the group. Sarah continued the game, moving the bowl so that the light created different patterns in the air. What exactly is happening? Here, he finally asked, his voice betraying the contained emotion. Sarah kept her gaze fixed on the girls, who continued fascinated with the game of light and water. They're learning to see, Mr. Adams, not with their eyes, but with something deeper, something that was always inside them, just dormant. 3 months passed since Sarah's arrival at the Adams mansion. The temporary contract that should have lasted only 90 days was extended indefinitely, a decision that Nathan made after witnessing transformations that defied his rational understanding. The twins, now nearly 13 years old, seemed to awaken from a long sleep. They spoke more, explored the house with growing independence, and demonstrated a perception of the environment that suggested something beyond the 4 senses that, theoretically, remained to them. On an autumn afternoon, as dry leaves danced through the garden, Nathan found himself driving along the winding road that led to the small town of Pine Ridge. The decision to personally investigate Sarah's past had not been easy. Part of him feared discovering something that could interrupt his daughter's progress. Another part, more rational and methodical, could not accept changes that he could not explain scientifically. The town, with just over 20,000 inhabitants, preserved the characteristic colonial architecture of the region. Old houses with colorful windows, small churches and stone streets told stories of an America that resisted time. Following the directions obtained at the local town hall, Nathan found the small rural district where Sarah had been born, a grouping of simple houses surrounded by verdant mountains. "I'm looking for information about the Wilson family," he explained to an elderly lady who sold crafts in the central square, specifically about Joe Wilson and his granddaughter Sarah. The lady's eyes lit up with recognition. Old Joe, the healer? Everyone knew him. He helped a lot of people around these parts. She lowered her voice, as if sharing a secret. "He had the gift of sight, you know. Not these eyes we use, but others that see beyond." The description immediately reminded Nathan of the words that Sarah used to describe the emerging abilities of his daughters. Eyes of silence, a form of perception that transcended conventional vision. "And Sarah? What do you know about her?" The lady smiled, adjusting the colorful shawl over her shoulders. "Special girl since she was little. Inherited her grandfather's gift, but in a different way. While old Joe was sought for cures, Sarah had a particular talent with lost children." "Lost children?" Nathan frowned. "Not lost as in getting lost in the woods," explained the lady with a patient smile. "Lost in spirit. Children who didn't speak, who didn't respond, who lived in their own world. She always managed to find a way to reach them." The description fit perfectly with what Sarah was doing with Katie and Bella. Nathan felt a shiver run down his spine. Where can I find more people who knew her? The lady pointed to a small corner house with blue windows and a garden full of herbs and flowers. "Mrs. Constance lives there, a midwife who worked with Sarah's mother for years. If there's anyone who knows the Wilson family history well, it's her." Thanking her, Nathan headed to the indicated house. Mrs. Constance, a woman of about 70 years, received him with the characteristic hospitality of the rural Appalachians: freshly brewed coffee, fresh cheese, and cornbread. When he explained the reason for his visit, her expression became serious and evaluative. "So Sarah is working for you, with your daughters?" Nathan nodded, suddenly feeling exposed under the penetrating gaze of the elderly woman. "And it's working, isn't it? Otherwise you wouldn't be here trying to understand." Again he agreed with a silent gesture. Mrs. Constance served more coffee and sat across from him, her wrinkled hands resting on the wooden tabletop. "Sarah carries an ancient knowledge, Mr. Adams, older than book medicine, older than this country. A knowledge that comes from the earth, from the stars, from the cycles of life. Her mother, Julia, was a midwife like me, but had a special gift for children who were born different, those who didn't cry, those who didn't look into the eyes, those who seemed to inhabit another world." "And Sarah? How did she develop these abilities?" "Natural as breathing. Since she was little, she demonstrated a sensitivity that frightened adults. She knew when it would rain before the clouds appeared, identified medicinal plants without. Anyone teaching her, and mainly connected with children that no one could reach. Mrs. Constance stood up and went to an old bookshelf, from which she retrieved a photo album. She opened it and showed a yellowed image. A young Sarah, perhaps 20 years old, surrounded by 5 children of different ages. These children here all had what doctors from the big city called problems: autism, epilepsy, rare syndromes. Medicine had given up on them. Sarah never gave up. She developed forms of communication through sounds, colors, textures, aromas. She awakened senses that were dormant, found alternative paths for the brain to process the world. Nathan observed the photograph attentively. Sarah's serene smile was the same he saw every day in his house, as well as the deep and attentive gaze. Why did she never seek formal recognition for this work? Why didn't she study, publish her methods? Mrs. Constance laughed softly. You really are a big city man. You think wisdom only exists when printed on letterhead. People like Sarah don't seek diplomas or recognition. They simply follow the calling, the gift they received. Besides, her expression became more grave. Official medicine doesn't always welcome knowledge it can't explain. Many times people like her were ridiculed, persecuted, even criminalized. The elderly woman's words penetrated deep into Nathan's conscience. As a businessman in the technology sector, he had built his life around logic, science, provable evidence. Now he was faced with something that defied these parameters. My daughters, and he began, hesitant. They were diagnosed with irreversible blindness at birth. All the tests, all the specialists confirmed that there's no function in the optic nerves. But since Sarah arrived, they seem to perceive light, shapes, even colors. How is this possible? Mrs. Constance observed him for a long moment before answering. Have you heard of extraocular vision? Nathan frowned, denying with a gesture. It's a theory that some scientists study, though few openly. The idea that the human brain can process visual information without using the eyes. Some call it dermal perception, others alternative vision. There are documented cases of blind people who manage to identify colors with their fingers, detect obstacles at a distance, even read letters without using touch. Is this scientifically proven? Science is still trying to understand, but the evidence exists, although many prefer to ignore it because it doesn't fit established theories. She leaned forward, lowering her voice. What Sarah does isn't magic, Mr. Adams. It's simply knowledge that conventional medicine hasn't yet reached. She awakens capabilities that already exist, but that need to be cultivated in a specific way. Nathan felt simultaneously disturbed and fascinated. The idea that his daughters could develop an alternative form of vision was revolutionary, and at the same time raised a disturbing question. If this is possible, why didn't any of the specialists I consulted over the years mention this? Possibility? Mrs. Constance shrugged. Perhaps because they didn't believe, perhaps because they didn't know how to stimulate this development, or perhaps, she hesitated, because some prefer definitive diagnoses to uncertain possibilities. The insinuation hung in the air. Nathan said goodbye shortly after, his mind buzzing with new information and questions. On the way back to Asheville, he drove mechanically, almost without seeing the road ahead. Mrs. Constance's words echoed in his mind, along with the images of his daughters following with their eyes the movement of soap bubbles in the garden or pointing to lightning during the storm. What if the diagnosis was wrong or incomplete? What if there were possibilities that conventional medicine didn't consider? Upon arriving home, it was already night. The mansion was silent, except for the low sound of music coming from the girls' room. He climbed the stairs, silently, and stopped at the half-open door. Sarah was sitting between the twins, an open book in her lap. It wasn't an ordinary book. The pages were made of different materials, some shiny, others textured. She passed the girl's fingers over each page, while narrating a story about a magic mountain. And at the top of the mountain, there was a lake so crystalline that it reflected all the colors of the sky, she was saying, guiding Bella's fingers, over a surface that looked like blue aluminum foil. Like the sky we saw today, commented Katie, her eyes half closed as if trying to remember. blue with white clouds. Exactly, confirmed Sarah. And when the sun hit the water, it turned golden, exclaimed Bella, normally the more reserved one, like the lights that dance when you shake the water in the bowl. Nathan felt his heart race. Increasingly, the girls spoke of colors, light, and shapes that theoretically they could never have experienced. He observed the scene for a few more minutes before quietly moving away. In his office, he opened the drawer where he kept all his daughter's medical reports. Reports from renowned hospitals in the United States and abroad, imaging tests, specialist evaluations, all unanimous in affirming the irreversibility of the condition. He looked at the latest report, signed by Dr. Edward Miller, director of the Clear Vision Clinic, where the girls had been diagnosed shortly after birth. The same doctor who, over the years, had supervised various confirmatory tests. A detail in the signature caught his attention. The professional registration number seemed different from what he remembered. He searched for older documents, and indeed there was a small discrepancy. It could just be a typing error, but something about that detail deeply bothered him. He turned on the computer and began to research the clinic and the doctor. Everything seemed to be in order. Dr. Miller was a respected professional with solid training and several published articles. The clinic, one of the most prestigious in Charlotte, served the elite of the region. He was about to turn off the computer when he noticed a small newspaper article in the search results. Dated 3 years ago, the text mentioned an investigation into possible irregularities in diagnoses at the Clear Vision Clinic. The article was vague, citing only that anonymous sources raised questions about diagnostic procedures in pediatric cases. Nathan felt a chill. The investigation had occurred approximately at the same time he had received an anonymous letter mentioning possible errors in tests performed at the clinic, a letter that, at the time, he had discarded as an extortion attempt. He returned to the file where he kept all correspondence related to his daughter's condition. After some searching, he found the yellowed envelope without a return address. The letter, written on a common printer, said only, "Mr. Adams, I work at the Clear Vision Clinic and have reason to believe that your daughter's diagnosis may be based on tests with irregularities. Mine is not the only case. There are other parents receiving definitive diagnoses without the proper confirmations. Please seek an independent second opinion." At the time, he had shown the letter to Dr. Miller, who dismissed it as the work of a disgruntled employee trying to tarnish the clinic's reputation. The doctor had even suggested new confirmatory tests, which once again attested to the girl's total blindness. Now, with everything he had witnessed in recent months, the letter gained new meaning. What if there was, in fact, something wrong with the original diagnoses? What if his daughter's condition wasn't exactly what he had been told? That night, Nathan could barely sleep. Something had been planted in his mind, a seed of doubt that, watered by the inexplicable progress of his daughters, began to germinate with overwhelming force. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give a like. Tell us what city you're watching from. We continue. The following weeks transformed Nathan Adams into an obsessed man. The possibility that his daughter's diagnosis might be wrong consumed him day and night. Without revealing his suspicions to anyone, not even to Rebecca or Sarah, he initiated a meticulous investigation that led him to contact former employees of the Clear Vision Clinic, review each test ever performed, and research similar cases around the world. During this period, the transformations in the twins continued at an accelerated pace. Under Sarah's patient guidance, they developed skills that defied the original diagnosis. They identified colors by touching objects, drew shapes with surprising precision, and seemed increasingly connected to the visual world that, supposedly, was inaccessible to them. One afternoon, upon returning from a meeting in Charlotte, Nathan found Sarah in the garden with the girls. She had set up a kind of sensory circuit: bowls with water at different temperatures, containers with sand, stones, seeds, dry and fresh leaves. The twins moved between the stations with increasing ease, describing sensations and associating them with memories and images. The sand is like tiny stars, said Katie, letting the grains flow between her fingers. I can see each one shining when it passes through my skin. The smooth stone is deep blue, commented Bella, holding a polished pebble, like the sky when it's getting dark. Sarah observed with a serene smile, occasionally offering words of encouragement or asking questions that stimulated the girls to deepen their perceptions. Upon noticing Nathan's presence, she made a discreet gesture for him to approach. Your daughters are rediscovering the world, Mr. Adams, she said in a low voice, building increasingly complex mental maps. Nathan observed his daughters for a moment before responding. They're seeing, aren't they? In some way we don't understand, but they are. It wasn't a question, but a statement. Sarah nodded slowly. The eyes are just one of the doors to vision, Mr. Adams. When that door closes, others can open if we have the patience and wisdom to find them. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Why didn't you explain what you were trying to do? Sarah's smile became understanding. You wouldn't have believed. You needed to see the results first with your own eyes. Besides, she made a significant pause. Some truths need to be discovered, not just heard. Nathan felt the weight of those words. Indeed, if Sarah had arrived talking about extraocular vision or alternative perception, he would probably have considered her a charlatan and never allowed her to approach his daughters. There's something I need to tell you, he finally said. Something I discovered recently. At that moment, Rebecca appeared in the garden, interrupting the conversation. Mr. Adams, there's a phone call for you. Says it's urgent. Nathan nodded, casting a significant look at Sarah before heading inside. The house. We'll continue this conversation later, he promised. In the office, he answered the phone call that would change the course of everything. Mr. Adams, this is Melissa Campbell, former laboratory technician at the Clear Vision Clinic. The female voice on the other end of the line sounded nervous. I received your message. We need to talk, but not over the phone. It's about your daughter's case. Nathan felt his heart race. Where can we meet? There's a cafe in Independence Square in the historic center. I can be there in an hour. I'll be there. He hung up the phone and remained motionless for a few moments, trying to process what that contact might mean. Finally, someone willing to talk. After weeks of contacting former clinic employees, most of whom refused to comment on any irregularity, this could be the confirmation he was seeking. Before leaving, he passed by his daughter's room. They had gone up with Sarah for their afternoon bath and were now sitting on the small veranda adjacent to the room while the woman combed their wet hair. I need to go out again, he announced. I'll be back for dinner. Are you meeting someone? Important, Dad? Asked Katie, turning her face in his direction. The question took him by surprise. How would she know? Why do you ask that, sweetheart? Your voice is different, more tight, like when you talk to the important men from the company. Nathan exchanged a quick look with Sarah, who smiled discreetly. Yes, it's someone important. Someone who might help us understand some things. About you two. About our special eyes, asked Bella, gently passing her fingers over her own eyelids. Yes, about your special eyes. The girls smiled, satisfied with the answer. Nathan said goodbye with a kiss to each one and departed, his mind buzzing with possibilities. The cafe in Independence Square was an old establishment, with dark wooden tables and a discreet environment, frequented mainly by tourists and local residents. Nathan chose a table at the back, from where he could observe the entrance without being immediately noticed. Melissa Campbell arrived punctually, a woman of approximately 40 years, short brown hair and glasses with a discreet frame. She looked around nervously before identifying Nathan and approaching with hesitant steps. Mr. Adams, thank you for coming. She sat down, placing a folder on the table. I don't have much time and I'm running a professional risk by talking to you. I appreciate your courage, Mrs. Campbell. Any information about my daughter's case is invaluable to me. Melissa nodded, adjusting her glasses in a nervous gesture. I worked in the laboratory of the Clear Vision Clinic for 8 years. I was responsible for processing electroretinography and visual evoked potential tests. essential tests for evaluating the function of the retina and optic nerve in cases of suspected blindness. Nathan recognized the names. They were exactly the tests that had diagnosed his daughter's condition shortly after birth. In 2012, approximately 6 months before leaving the clinic, I began to notice inconsistencies in some results of pediatric tests, patterns that didn't seem to correspond to the protocols we followed. She opened the folder and removed some sheets with graphs. These are examples of normal, abnormal, and questionable results. Your daughters fit into the third category. Nathan examined the documents with attention. Although he didn't have the technical knowledge to fully interpret the graphs, he could perceive significant differences between them. What exactly does this mean? Melissa took a deep breath before answering. It means that the tests that diagnosed your daughters with irreversible blindness presented anomalies that should have been investigated more deeply. At the very least, the tests should have been repeated on another equipment or laboratory. And they weren't? No. Dr. Miller signed the definitive reports based on these first evaluations, classifying the case as irreversible bilateral congenital optic neuropathy. Nathan felt a wave of anger growing inside him. Why would he do that? Why misdiagnose 2 children with such a serious condition? Melissa looked around, making sure no one was observing them. The clinic maintained partnerships with pharmaceutical laboratories that developed experimental treatments for rare ophthalmological conditions. The more cases diagnosed, the more funding for research they received. She paused, carefully choosing her words. Additionally, Dr. Miller was developing a follow-up protocol for children with congenital blindness that he intended to patent and market internationally. Are you telling me my daughters were incorrectly diagnosed to feed research statistics? Nathan's voice trembled with indignation. I cannot categorically state that the diagnosis was wrong, pondered Melissa, cautious. Only that the tests presented irregularities that raised doubts about the conclusion. In science, Mr. Adams, questionable results require more tests, not hasty conclusions. The subsequent tests, the ones that were carried out over the years, did they also present these anomalies? Melissa nodded gravely. The equipment was calibrated in a specific way for follow-up tests. The system was biased, let's say, programmed to find what was expected to find. Nathan felt as if the ground were opening beneath his feet. For 12 years he had based his life, his decisions, the raising of his daughters on a diagnosis that now revealed itself to be, at the very least, doubtful. Why are you telling me this now? Why didn't you speak before? I tried, Mr. Adams. The anonymous letter you received 3 years ago, I was the one who sent it. She lowered her gaze. After I left the clinic, I tried to report the irregularities, but Dr. Miller is a powerful man with connections throughout the healthcare system. I was threatened with a defamation lawsuit, placed on a blacklist that prevented me from working in any respectable laboratory for years. Her voice trembled slightly. Now I'm about to move abroad. They can't reach me anymore. Nathan looked at the documents in front of him, feeling an explosive mixture of emotions, anger, guilt, hope. What does this mean for my daughters? Could they really have some degree of vision that was suppressed or ignored all these years? It's possible. Cases of congenital blindness frequently preserve some perception of light or movement, especially if correctly stimulated from an early age. The human brain is incredibly adaptable, especially in childhood. She hesitated. But it's also possible that they've developed alternative forms of perception, such as the extraocular vision that some researchers are beginning to study. Exactly what Sarah had suggested, exactly what Nathan was witnessing in his own home. What should I do now? How can I be sure? Take them to be examined at another medical center, preferably outside the country, where there are no connections with the Clear Vision Clinic. Insist on complete tests, without prejudices or expectations based on the previous history. Melissa gathered the documents and returned them to the folder. And, Mr. Adams, be prepared for any result. Even if they have some visual capacity, 12 years of incorrect diagnosis and lack of adequate stimulation may have caused permanent damage. Nathan nodded, feeling the weight of that possibility. Even if the original diagnosis was wrong, the lost time might be irrecoverable. "I have one more question," he said as Melissa prepared to leave. "Do you know the work of someone named Sarah Wilson?" The former technician frowned, thoughtful. "The name isn't familiar to me. Why?" "She has been working with my daughters using unconventional methods. She's obtaining results that defy everything we believe to be possible." A small smile appeared on Melissa's lips. "Science doesn't have all the answers, Mr. Adams. Sometimes those whom orthodox medicine calls healers or charlatans are just people who have found paths that science hasn't yet mapped." She stood up, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "If this woman is helping your daughters, continue with her regardless of what new tests reveal. Some types of healing cannot be measured in a laboratory." With these words, she said goodbye and quickly left the cafe, leaving Nathan alone with his reflections and a folder full of documents that could rewrite his family's history. The journey back home seemed endless. Nathan drove automatically, his mind a whirlwind of contradictory thoughts. Anger at the possible mistaken diagnosis, guilt for not having questioned more, investigated more, sought other opinions over the years, hope in the face of the possibilities that now opened up, and a profound feeling of gratitude towards Sarah, whose arrival had triggered all this transformation. Upon arriving at the mansion, it was already night. The lights on the second floor were on, indicating that the girls were still awake. He went up directly, without stopping to speak with Rebecca or any other employee. He found Sarah sitting between the twins on Katie's bed, an open book in her lap, not one of the sensory books she herself had created, but a common book with paper pages and small colored illustrations. And so, the girl discovered that she could see the stars not only with her eyes, but with her heart, read Sarah, gently passing the girl's fingers over the printed words. Upon perceiving their father's presence, both turned their faces in his direction with identical smiles. "Dad!" exclaimed Bella. "Sarah is teaching us to read with our fingers. It's not braille, it's different. It's like the letters have their own light," completed Katie. "I can feel them shining under my fingers." Nathan approached slowly, observing the scene with new eyes. These weren't just his blind daughters developing compensatory senses, as he had always believed. It was something much deeper, an awakening of capabilities that had been dormant, perhaps suppressed by a wrong diagnosis and years of imposed limitations. "Sarah," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "can we talk after the girls are asleep? I discovered something important today." The woman nodded, her gaze revealing that somehow she already knew this would be a decisive moment. "Certainly, Mr. Adams. We'll finish this story, and they'll be ready to sleep." An hour later, they met in the mansion's library. Nathan reported everything he had discovered, the inconsistencies in the tests, the questionable motivations behind the diagnosis, the possibility that the twins always had some unidentified visual potential. Sarah listened attentively without showing surprise. "You already suspected this, didn't you?" Nathan finally asked. "From the first day when you said there was dormant light in this house." She smiled serenely. "I didn't know about the medical details, of course. But yes, I perceived that there was more to those girls than the diagnosis allowed to see. They responded to light, to movement in subtle ways that only someone trained to observe could notice." "Why didn't you tell me directly?" "Because you needed to discover for yourself. You needed to question the certainties to which you clung. And more importantly," her gaze became deep and penetrating, "your daughters needed time to awaken, without the pressure of expectations or tests." Nathan nodded, understanding the wisdom behind that approach. "What happens now? Should I take them for new tests? Seek treatments that might recover what was lost?" Sarah reflected for a moment before answering. "Tests, yes. It's important to know their true condition, without the bias of the past. As for treatments, they're already in the best possible treatment. They're rediscovering the world at their own pace, developing connections that perhaps no doctor could predict or stimulate with conventional techniques. And you, will you continue working with us? If you so wish. My work with your daughters is just beginning." She smiled. There's much more light to awaken in them. That night, lying in his bed, Nathan reflected on the extraordinary path they had traveled. The daughters who for years existed as silent shadows now overflowed with life and curiosity. The mansion that had been a mausoleum of lost hopes was again a home. And all because a simple woman from rural North Carolina, carrying ancestral knowledge and a perception that transcended conventional medicine, had seen what all the specialists had ignored, that some lights merely sleep, waiting for the right touch to awaken. Spring arrived in Asheville, bringing renewal. Colorful flowers dotted the gardens of the Adams mansion, which now remained with windows and doors constantly open, allowing natural light to flood each room. The oppressive silence that for years had dominated the environment had been replaced by children's laughter, animated conversations and music. The twins had discovered a surprising talent for the piano, guided by their sharp ears and a sensitivity to vibrations that no one had imagined possible. 6 months had passed since the revelation about the questionable diagnosis. During this period, Nathan had undertaken a journey to uncover the truth about his daughter's condition, a search that had taken him to medical centers in Europe and the United States, where the girls were subjected to a battery of new tests, performed by specialists without any connection to the Clear Vision Clinic. The results, though complex, were revolutionary. Katie and Bella were not completely blind, as they had been diagnosed. Both possessed what the specialists called uncategorized residual vision, a limited but present capacity to perceive light, movement, and under certain conditions, even shapes and colors. This capacity, neglected and unstimulated for 12 years, had remained dormant, but had not completely extinguished. Even more surprising were the advanced neurological tests, which revealed that the twins' brains had developed alternative pathways to process visual information. Synesthesia, the ability of one sense to trigger another, had manifested in an extraordinary way, allowing them to process tactile information as visual images or to translate sounds into spatial perceptions. "It's fascinating," explained Dr. Lawrence, a Swiss neuroscientist who led the most recent tests. "Their brains compensated for the limited visual information by creating unique neural connections. When they touch an object, for example, the visual area of the brain activates simultaneously with the tactile area. It's as if they could see with their fingers, not just feel." The scientific confirmation of what Sarah had perceived intuitively from the beginning brought validation, but also a painful recognition of lost time. Years of potential development had been wasted due to a hasty and possibly manipulated diagnosis. Nathan had initiated legal proceedings against the Clear Vision Clinic and Dr. Miller, not for vengeance or financial compensation, but to prevent other families from going through the same experience. The investigation, still ongoing, had already revealed other similar cases, children diagnosed with irreversible conditions, whose tests presented the same anomalies found in those of Katie and Bella. But on that Saturday morning, as he observed his daughters in the garden, Nathan wasn't thinking about legal proceedings or medical diagnoses. He was completely absorbed in the scene before him. Katie and Bella, now 13 years old, running barefoot on the grass, following colorful butterflies that Sarah had attracted with specific flowers strategically planted. "The blue one is going to the jasmine," shouted Katie, pointing with surprising precision. "I saw it, and there's a yellow one near the rose bush," responded Bella, turning gracefully to follow the insect's flight. They didn't see like other children, certainly. Their vision was limited, fragmented, more sensitive to movement and vibrant colors than to static details, but it was vision, undeniably, a window to the world that everyone had believed to be permanently closed. Sarah approached silently, observing the same scene that enchanted Nathan. "They bloom each day," she commented, a serene smile on her lips. "Thanks to you," answered Nathan, the gratitude evident in his voice. "If you hadn't arrived, if you hadn't perceived what all of us ignored for years." Sarah gently shook her head. "It wasn't me, Mr. Adams. It was their own nature seeking expression. I merely offered the appropriate environment and stimuli, like a gardener who doesn't create the flower, just provides the conditions for it to bloom by itself." Nathan nodded, recognizing the wisdom in those words. In the last months, he had learned to value Sarah's philosophy as much as her practical methods. The holistic vision she brought, the understanding that body, mind, and spirit form an inseparable unity, had transformed not only the lives of the twins, but his own. Still, without you, we would be trapped in the same cycle. I would continue believing what I was told, and they would continue limited by the diagnosis they received. Sarah smiled, her eyes following the movements of the girls who were now sitting on the grass, examining with fascination a small wildflower. "Do you know what impresses me most about them?" she asked. "It's not the visual capacity that's awakening, although it is extraordinary. It's the absence of bitterness, of resentment. They don't look back, lamenting the lost years. They simply celebrate each new discovery as a gift." It was true. Despite understanding in their way that they had been deprived of experiences and development by an incorrect diagnosis, the twins never showed anger or frustration about the past. They lived intensely in the present, absorbing each new sensation, each newly discovered color, each shape that slowly gained definition in their emerging visual world. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," said Nathan after a moment of contemplative silence, "about what comes next for them." "And what do you envision?" "They'll need formal education. They spent too much time isolated, without interaction, with other children, without the intellectual stimuli they deserved." He paused, organizing thoughts he had been cultivating for weeks. "I thought about hiring private tutors initially, to help them reach the academic level appropriate for their age. Then perhaps a specialized school that can meet their specific needs." Sarah nodded, thoughtful. "Those are good ideas. They have minds hungry for knowledge, but remember that their learning will continue to be different. Don't try to fit them into traditional models." "Regarding that," continued Nathan, "I have another project in mind. Something broader." Sarah's eyes shone with interest. "I'm considering creating a foundation, a research and development center focused on alternative sensory perception and unconventional stimulation methods for children with visual impairments." He smiled, excited about the idea he had been cultivating. "I want to unite the most advanced scientific knowledge with traditional approaches like yours. Create a space where doctors and healers, scientists and folk practitioners can collaborate instead of opposing each other." "A bridge between worlds," commented Sarah, clearly touched by the proposal. "It's a noble vision, Mr. Adams. And I would like you to be a fundamental part of this project, not just as a caretaker for my daughters, but as a consultant, teacher, director of intuitive methods." He looked at her seriously. "Your knowledge is too valuable to remain restricted to this house, Sarah. There are thousands of children like Katie and Bella throughout America, diagnosed, labeled, and limited by a medicine that doesn't always see beyond its own paradigms." The proposal clearly moved Sarah, whose eyes briefly welled up before she regained her composure. "It would be an honor to contribute to such a project, not for me, but for the children who could benefit, and for the wisdom of the ancients. That deserves to be preserved and integrated with modern knowledge, not discarded as superstition." They were interrupted by Katie, who was running in their direction with something in her hands. "Dad, Sarah, look what we found!" In her extended palms, a small wildflower with purple petals and a bright yellow center. Nothing particularly special to ordinary eyes, but clearly a treasure for the girl. "It's a wild violet," explained Sarah. "It grows spontaneously in places where the soil is good." "It shines," exclaimed Katie. "It's as if it had its own light. I can see each petal, each tiny line." Bella approached as well, observing the flower in her sister's hands. "It's so alive," she commented with her habitual introspection, "as if it were pulsing." Nathan and Sarah exchanged significant looks. It was another confirmation of the extraordinary progress of the girls. Their ability to perceive details increased each day, although in unconventional ways. They didn't see like others, but they saw in their unique way with a sensitivity that, in some aspects, surpassed normal vision. "This reminds me," said Sarah, "that it's time for our session with the crystals. The sun is in the perfect position now." The twins showed immediate enthusiasm. The sessions with crystals, where Sarah used different stones and crystals to refract the sunlight into colored patterns, had become one of their favorite activities, combining visual stimulation with guided meditation. "Can I participate today?" asked Nathan, surprising himself with the request. It was the first time he had shown interest in directly participating in the therapeutic activities developed by Sarah. Normally, he observed from a distance or received reports afterward, still not completely comfortable with methods that escaped his rational understanding. Sarah's smile lit up. "Of course, Mr. Adams, your presence will be welcome." The girls showed joy at their father's participation, each taking one of his hands to guide him to the special place that Sarah had prepared in the garden, a small circle of stones under a leafy tree, where the filtered light created natural patterns on the ground. They all sat on cushions arranged on the lawn. Sarah removed from a small fabric bag various stones and crystals of different sizes and colors: rose quartz, amethyst, citrine, aquamarine. She positioned them strategically, where the rays of sun that passed through the leaves could hit them, creating colored reflections that danced through the space. "Close your eyes first," she instructed. "Breathe deeply and feel the presence of light even without seeing it directly." Everyone obeyed, including Nathan, who was surprised by his own willingness to enter the experience without reservations. "Now slowly open your eyes and observe without trying to define or name. Just allow the light to tell its own story." When Nathan opened his eyes, he immediately understood his daughter's fascination. The crystals transformed the sunlight into a spectacle of fragmented colors, points, lines, and patches that moved gently with the breeze that swayed the branches. It wasn't a structured or defined vision, but a living kaleidoscope of pure colors. This was exactly how the girls described their emerging vision, not as clear and complete images, but as fragments of light and color that formed significant patterns. "Is this how you see the world?" he asked in a low voice, observing the delight on his daughters' faces as they followed the colored reflections. "Sometimes," answered Katie. "Other times it's more like shadows and bright spots. It depends on the light, the movement, and on our eyes of silence," completed Bella, using the expression that Sarah had taught. "When I use my normal eyes, I see less. When I use my eyes of silence, I see more." Sarah observed the interaction with serene contentment. For the first time, Nathan seemed to truly understand the unique sensory experience of his daughters, not as a deficiency to be lamented or a miracle to be celebrated, but as a different and valid way of perceiving the world. They remained like this for almost an hour, observing the dancing lights, occasionally sharing perceptions or simply existing together in that moment of silent communion. For Nathan, it was a revelation. He finally understood what Sarah had tried to explain to him from the beginning, that healing didn't necessarily lie in recovering normal vision, but in awakening and valuing the unique capabilities that his daughters possessed. When the sun began to change position, reducing the effect of the crystals, Sarah gently ended the session. The girls helped collect the stones, handling them with reverence, as if each contained a particular universe. "Thank you," said Nathan to Sarah when the girls moved away, running toward the house to wash their hands before lunch, "for allowing me to see through their eyes, even if just for a moment." Sarah nodded, understanding the depth of that gratitude. "The true miracle isn't in the eyes that see, Mr. Adams, but in the heart that opens to other ways of seeing." 3. Years passed. The Dormant Light Foundation, conceived by Nathan Adams and developed with the essential collaboration of Sarah Wilson, had become a reality. Installed on a large property on the outskirts of Asheville, the institution combined research center, specialized school, and treatment clinic, serving children and young people with various visual conditions. The Foundation's revolutionary approach, integrating cutting-edge medicine with traditional knowledge, attracted researchers and professionals from across the country and even from abroad. Scientific studies were beginning to validate what Sarah had always known intuitively, that there are multiple forms of vision beyond conventional ocular perception, and that methods considered alternative can awaken capabilities that traditional medicine often ignores. The case of the Adams twins had become a reference study, cited in international conferences on neuroplasticity and sensory perception. Katie and Bella, now 16-year-old teenagers, actively participated in the foundation, not just as patients or success examples, but as collaborators who helped develop new methods based on their own experiences. The mansion that had once been a space of isolation and sadness had been transformed. The second floor, once the exclusive domain of the twins, now housed a small research center where scientists and traditional medicine practitioners worked side by side. The garden, enlarged and enriched with aromatic plants and colorful flower species, served as a therapeutic space where Sarah conducted sessions with children from throughout the region. On one particularly significant afternoon, Nathan observed, from the terrace, a scene he would never have imagined possible years ago. On the main lawn, his daughters were conducting an activity with a group of blind or low-vision children. Using the methods that Sarah had developed with them, they taught the little ones to perceive colors through touch, sound, aroma. Blue is cool like water, explained Katie, guiding the hands of a girl of approximately 8 years over an aquamarine crystal. If you pay attention, you can feel the color vibrating under your fingers. Red is warm and pulses, complimented Bella, working with another group. Like your heart. Place your hand on your chest and feel. That's the energy of red. Sarah supervised discreetly, intervening only when necessary. Her role had evolved over the years, from housekeeper to therapist, from therapist to teacher, from teacher to director of methodologies at the foundation. Her knowledge, once restricted to small communities in the countryside, was now documented, studied, and implemented in protocols that benefited hundreds of children. Rebecca, who had remained as housekeeper of the house and now helped in the administration of the foundation, approached Nathan on the terrace. Dr. Martin just arrived for the meeting, sir. He's waiting in the office. Nathan nodded, but didn't move immediately. He was absorbed in the transformation he was witnessing, not just that of his daughters, but his own. The pragmatic and skeptical businessman who had blindly trusted conventional science had given way to a more balanced man who had learned to value different forms of knowledge. The distant and resigned father had transformed into an active and present participant in his daughters' lives, learning from them as much as he tried to teach them. You know, Rebecca, he commented, I still sometimes wonder what it would be, like if Sarah hadn't entered our lives, if we would have remained trapped in that darkness that wasn't the girls' but ours. Our inability to see beyond what we were told was possible. Rebecca smiled. She too had undergone her own transformation, abandoning her initial skepticism to embrace the unconventional methods she witnessed working day after day. Destiny has curious ways of operating, Mr. Adams. Perhaps it was exactly the right moment for all of us. Nathan nodded, casting a final look at the garden before heading to the meeting. Katie had just raised her face toward the sun, eyes half closed, a smile of pure delight illuminating her features. By her side, Bella was leading a small child in a circular dance, both laughing as they followed the rhythm of music that only they seemed to fully hear. They were images he would carry with him for the rest of his life, constant reminders that true vision doesn't depend only on the eyes, but on the willingness to see possibilities where others see only limitations. The light that had once slept in that house now shone intensely, illuminating not just the life of his family, but expanding to touch other lives, other stories, other destinies.